to be talking about the frame. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about the frame. I say talking about the frame because I've already built it before deciding to document everything with the video. What you need for the frame is, of course, the extrusions, the protrusions, the masonry protrusions, and some screws. So for the blind joints, the BOM recommends M5 into 8. However, if you did get your extrusions tapped by Misumi, there should be enough threads to take up to a M5 into 16, which I would definitely recommend. I went ahead and built it with M5 into 8s, except for one joint. I think it was this one, because I ended up stripping the threads on the aluminum. It's quite soft, and if you accidentally over tighten it, it'll strip. It's 8 mm is very little thread, so I just replaced it with 16 mm and it worked fine at that point. So yeah, so you're going to need the screws for your blind joints, M5 into 8 mm if you want to go the BOM way, or you can just use M5 into 16s and it'll work fine. And of course, use the thread locker and all these joints. The protrusions, as you may be able to see, I went with the larger ones here for the center beam, and the rest are the smaller ones. So the smaller ones, you need M5 into 10s and some what you call them, spring-loaded nuts, which you put in, spring-loaded T-nuts, which you go into the extrusions, and then you put in M5 into 10s on all these smaller joints, like the ones you see at the bottom. No, the larger ones need M5 into 14. So if you're going this way, just get M5 into 14s for these. But this again is optional according to the BOM, so it's not really necessary. You could just use the regular smaller size ones on here as well. The next thing we can talk about is the internal L brackets. Again, a completely optional piece because these are blind jointed, but they do recommend the internal ones as well, so I put the internal ones in too. To assemble the frame is actually not very complicated. What I would recommend or suggest is you start with it upside down. So with the frame upside down on a flat surface, not this surface, as you can see it is wobbly, I would not recommend building it on a wooden surface. Build it on glass or granite. All you need to do is get these 4 horizontal pieces, the top 4 horizontal pieces and the 4 verticals, and start by assembling them. So to assemble them, the easy technique is to put something like this, if you can see on the cam. You just check. Yep. So put a 2020 extrusion next to it, so it lines up right, and then tighten the screw. So do it for all the corners, and then you have one side completed. Once that is done, go ahead and put everything else in, but don't tighten them down. So put the horizontal extrusion for the back rail, the vertical extrusion which holds this in place, and the 4 bottom horizontal extrusions. Put them all in place, but don't tighten them down just yet. Put them in place where they reasonably hold where they are. Once that is done, put it back on this side, and at which point what I would say is this gap at the bottom is exactly about 20 mm in the CAD. So to get this lined up, what I did was use 2 extrusions, 2020 extrusions, like this. Once these 2020 again, you still need to build this on a flat surface, not on a wooden surface, either granite or glass, whichever one you have access to. I put 2 of them like this, and then tightened up the let me see if you can see it there. There is the camera angle issue, so anyway, what I will do is put these in and then tighten them down. Of course, the image is also hugely distorted because I'm using ultra wide angle. Let me just come back here, maybe see and show you a little better. Yep. So once you have these 2 down, go ahead and push this down on this and tighten all the blind joints. Once blind joints are tightened in, then you can go ahead and tighten up the internal L joints, because once everything is in place, you can go ahead and tighten these down. Then of course this needs to be tightened, all these joints. Before you tighten them, make sure that the gap between this side and this side is even. If the spacing is even, go ahead and tighten them down, and similarly for the center one, you can go ahead and tighten them down. Of course, what I would always notice is with builds, even if you get your extrusion cut by Misumi, they're not going to be perfectly equal. Not each one of them will have some little deviation, and that even if you get it as flat as possible, you're still going to have some torsion built into the frame because of one joint, one extrusion being maybe slightly longer, one being slightly shorter, and we're talking about really small differences like 0.05 or so on, 0.05 mm, but that will result in some torsion, and the frame will shake as it is doing now, but it is shaking right now on a wooden surface which is not flat. But if I put this on a granite surface, it shouldn't shake. So once you're done with everything and you're still noticing there is some shaking, there is some torsion built up, assuming everything else is square and you did your checks, what I just did was loosen these nuts up and just move this extrusion slightly to get relief of the tension, or put in opposite torsion to whichever side it was acting on, and that flattens the frame, keeps it nice and flat. Again, don't do it on a wooden surface because it is going to shake no matter what. So that's it. So the frame construction is rather simple. It doesn't take much time. I can tell you, compared to a voron 2.4 frame, this is pretty much on par with difficulty. It is slightly less difficult than a V0.1 frame, which is more open on one side. But yeah, getting it square and everything, getting everything done is rather simple. So once you're done with the frame, you might have noticed that I do at this point have some printed parts attached to the rails. Oh yeah, we do need to put in the rails. So to put in the rails, it's pretty simple. Go ahead and put some spring-loaded T-nuts. If you're not doing spring-loaded, then you should have loaded them already before you do this. If you do hammerhead or spring-loaded, you can always put them in later. So what I did was use some post-assembly nuts, spring-loaded nuts, and put all the rails in. So 1 rail, 2, 3, and the 4 rails on top. All these rails are 250 mm ones. The longer ones are used only for the cross gantry. Yeah, so now that we have all this here, you might wonder why this printed part is here. The reason being, it's really hard to assemble this part or even put the rail in post-assembly because this extrusion is always in the way. So once the assembly was done, what I did was just loosen these 2 nuts and remove the back extrusion. Once the back extrusion is removed, I went ahead and installed the rail and the parts that are going to hold the belt. So this red piece is going to hold the belt, and under that you will have a green one which is going to hold the extrusion. So put them all in. I'll put in a video at this point. So once you finish assembling your frame, the first thing you want to do is get this rear top extrusion out. So just loosen these 2 screws and just slip it out. The reason we're going to remove it is because I think it's going to be a lot easier to install the rail and the parts for the cross gantry rail with the extrusion removed, because otherwise you have the rear extrusion blocking your way and you can't really screw anything in. So once you got the extrusion out, all you need to do is fit the rail, which is fairly simple. I've gone for the alternate hole approach. This is what I'm going to use for all rails. I haven't centered or tightened this rail yet because there is still some stuff left to do, like positioning the end stops and the motor mounts and the expiry motor mounts before we want to tighten the rails in place. But for now, we just need to install it a little loose and you can leave it at that. The next thing you need is a couple of printed parts. So you need this. This is the belt holder. So this kind of goes on top of the block, and then the belt would go in through here with a separate tooth block, and then it would be held in place in here. So there will be a screw that goes from here and then holds it in place. And the last part is this, which goes underneath this one. So let's see if I'm positioning this correctly. I think it should be over this side. Yeah. So this one is where the cross gantry rail is going to go, and then there is going to be a square nut and a magnet in here to help position the rails, is what I'm thinking that's for. But yeah, there's going to be some stuff in there as well. So these are the parts we need. This process will be duplicated across the front rail as well. So this is a rear back extrusion or the rear top extrusion. The front top extrusion also will have the same assembly pattern because they're both going to have, or rather they are the Y, and the X is slightly different. It runs on a lower level than the Y, so it stacks up a little higher. Yeah, we'll look at that when we get to it. But yeah, so let's start assembling this one. So for fasteners, what are we doing for fasteners? We need three 25mm M3s, one 16mm M3 with a magnet attached. Of course, you need the magnet as well. It's stuck to my screw. Then you need one 20mm M3. I only have button head caps, but I guess you can use socket head caps just as well. One 10mm M3 and one square nut. So with this, let's start assembling. So how do we first position this? So you look at the CAD to make sure your positioning is right. But in this rear extrusion, let's assume this, we're looking at this from the back of the printer. We need this angle and this opening to be visible on the outside. And if you notice here, there is, oh yeah, I forgot to tell you, you need one heat set in here as well. So the heat set needs to be put in. I'm not really sure what this holds, but it needs a heat set in here. The second thing is we have 4 screws on the rail block, and if you look at the ones which line up, you will see one that lines up is this gap. These two line up, and then there is one recessed hole here which also lines up. So the first thing we need to do, so if you're looking at from the back, for the rear extrusion, it's going to look like this. So this has to be outside, this side goes to the inside of the printer. So the first thing we need to do is take the 10mm one and we screw it in. Okay, now we position this with the 10mm one, then let's put this square nut in here. So take this piece, put the square nut inside, then we take the magnet and push it on top. So this is the assembly that needs here. So then what happens is the 16mm screw screws in to the square nut and then pushes the magnet forward and backward. I guess to tighten on the rail or position the rail, depending on, making sure both sides are equally positioned. I guess that's probably what it's being used for. Yeah, as you can see, the magnet is moving now. Okay, so let's put it back to fully in position. Okay, so now with this in, so you can just slide the rail and then move this in. So you can, let's go ahead and type. So this is how this piece is going to sit. So we need the 25mm screws, and these are going to go directly into the rail blocks or other blocks. Before I do this, I think it might make sense to actually tighten the other screw properly, because I don't think we're going to go back, because it's not going to be accessible anymore once we install this. So let's move this. Okay, so that should be good. Let's tighten the other ones. This looks like it doesn't want to go in. Where does this feel? Oh yeah. Okay, so the 3 25mm M3s are in, the 16mm M3 is in, the square nut is captive in this piece, and the magnet has been installed. So the last thing to do is to take this 20mm screw. In this case, I'm using a button head cap, but yeah, I mean the CAD it just says socket head cap. I think this is just to keep the rail in place. Yeah, so I think extra screw gives some added support for the rail to be in place. So yeah, that's it. So now that this is done, so this is what the belt holder is going to look like on each of these blocks, the 4 blocks on top. So now that this is done, we'll go back and install this on the main frame, and then we'll get back to the rest of the assembly. Alright, so now that we have the frame done and most of the rails in, or rather all the 250mm rails in, it's time to put in the cross gantry 300mm ones. So to put these in, so if we're going to start with the x-axis. Yeah, this is the x-axis. So like I said, we did the x-axis first. I may have incorrectly referred to as y-axis. It is a bit confusing because the xy carriage kind of sits at different angles, so I could keep getting confused between x and y. But this is the x, so we have the x-axis here, and the cross-gantry rail. Do pay attention to the orientation. The x-axis rail goes in with the block towards the inside of the printer. So we have the printer upside down now, and this is going to go this way. The y-axis rail would go rather on this way. So anyway, we're going with the x-axis now. What we've done is push them through in these 2 places. So you have pushed it here, and here it's inside this holding area. So what you're going to do is install it. I mean, it's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. What I would say is I'm using 6.5mm thick rails. So these rails are 6.5mm thick. Most Chinese clones are 6.5mm thick. So I would go with the 6.5mm part from the STLs. If you got the robot dig rails, I guess they are 6mm. Now here's the interesting bit. So Hyvens are 6.5mm, most Chinese clones are 6.5mm. However, THK and other Korean rails, or even Misumi's own rails, they are 5.5mm thick. I mean, the overall height is the same. I think there's 10mm from the rail's bottom to the top of the block, but the rail itself is thinner. There is no part right now for the 5.5mm one, so if you use those rails, you're going to have to do some modification to this part. But if you use a 6mm or a 6.5mm, then yeah, the STLs do have those parts. So to fit this rail, we're just going to push it back in that side. Let's tighten all the screws down later. And similarly on this side. So again, you're going to need 3 25mm M3s. The 25mm M3s, of course, go directly into the block. The 20mm M3, which I'm still using button head caps, go into the belt holder. So that's it. So with this done, next we will go ahead. I'm going to tighten the screws up. Then I can tighten them off camera. Next we will start assembling the Y blocks, or rather the Y belt holders and the cross gantry holder. Alright, so now that we've got these screwed in or bolted in, the next thing we're going to do is do the y-axis. I think it's the y-axis, yeah. So this is the z, so that goes the right, this is the back, yeah. So this is doing the y-axis. For the y-axis, you need this extra part. So this is going to be a spacer, which is going to go here, and that is what is going to lift this cross gantry rail above this rail. Then of course we need the belt holder block, and then this is the linear rail holder. So the assembly is pretty similar. So we need a so for fasteners, you need longer ones. Obviously, you need 45mm, 3 45mm, 1 30mm, and these two remain constant. So same as this one. 16mm which goes in here, the linear rail holder block, and 20mm which screws into the block from here. So those two remain the same. These have become longer. Yeah, so this is for this side. So, okay, so let's just put this quickly together. So we put these square nut in there, tighten this, then we need a magnet. Let's insert the 6x3. Alright, so the magnet is in as well. So with all this in, let's start assembling. So the first thing we're going to do is put in the one which you know for sure has to go in from here, which is the 30 mm. So this was 10 mm on these sides. The same screw is now 30 mm because of the spacer. Okay, so it looks like we need to thread it in a little bit. And it doesn't seem to be going straight. No. Okay, so now that is in, you want to get this one in reasonably tight because you can't access it after you put this in. The next thing I'm going to do, I find it easier to insert these in first. So I believe this is the right one for this side. Let's just quickly check. So you'll have one hole which is already gone in. So the second and is here. So this goes here, 3 and 4, and this is the separate hole which goes into the heatset. So this is the right side. And this rail, of course, goes the other way around. You want the bottom of the rail facing towards the inside of the printer. So let's go ahead and fit this in. So this is definitely a bit tight. Perhaps this is intentional, but it is definitely tight. So yeah, now that you've got this one in, I'm going to go ahead and put the other one. So it's not as loose a fit that you can push it in once you have it installed. So at least for me, it seems pretty tight. Okay. Yeah, this seems quite alright now, so now we have it on both sides. So let's go ahead and install it. So for this one, like I said, the M320 will remain the same. So this goes here and just goes into the heatset, so that spacing is the same. Let's go ahead and actually put these longer screws which go directly into the block. Now, the screw hole is actually pretty snug, so it's kind of mildly threading in all the way. I don't know, that's hopefully that doesn't cause any problems, because I mean, it's not going to really cause any problems, but if it's mildly threading in, sometimes it's really hard to line, but yeah, this went in fine. This is actually pretty exhausting. So use an electric screwdriver if you have one at this stage. But yeah, I don't have one, so I'm going to just go with this. Yeah, that's it. It's went in right nice and easy. So just 2 more screws. So this again is the 45 mm. It's going to go straight into the block. So lot more screwing in. I don't even know if you can actually see this because of the angle, but I'm really not doing anything other than screwing it in, really. I'm using my monitor as a supplementary light source and keeps going to sleep. Probably need to change that setting. Then they have the last screw, which is a 20 mm. For this, since it's a button head cap, you need a smaller. And at this point, I'm not sure my hands are capable of putting the screw in. They're pretty tired from screwing these in. Yes, what I'm going to do is take a quick break, and when we come back, I'll have all the screws in on that side as well. So yeah, I mean, this is really painful. Probably use an electric screwdriver if you have one. And we're done. So at this point, we have the frame assembled. We have all the rails installed, including the cross gantry ones, the 300 mm ones. The only thing that's really left to do is to center these on the 2020 extrusions, and at this point, this might need some adjustment. Pull it, depending on how accurate your rail was cut. It might have to be pulled out or not. But yeah, that's something we'll deal with later. Because before I center these on the extrusion, I had to install the motor mounts, the XY motor mount, and the pulleys that go in here. We'll see how much space that occupies. I think the end stops also go in these gaps, so we need to figure out how much space those need to make sure they're centered on the extrusion this way, and then we'll center it this side. Yeah, but that's it. So we're done with the frame, and let's move to the next steps, I guess.